The field of political science can be quite a complicated and tedious subject matter for many people, hence the lack of interest from many Americans. Hell, even someone like myself, who is incredibly enthusiastic and passionate about this branch of knowledge, can be overwhelmed and bored from time to time. But we are not here to sulk on politics as a whole. We are here to sulk on campaign finance reform, particularly in California. This video will briefly explore the history of policy attempts in California, the parties behind the kerfuffle, and the merit of both their arguments. Before we get started though, there must be one counter-argument / question that an audience member might have, and that is, why should there be any government regulation on campaign spending? Would it not be better if we let whoever donate what they want? Well, to give a fairly simplistic answer, it would be to level the political playing field between everyday voters and large special interests. Anyone on the political spectrum can see the importance of making democratic concessions to keep your population happy. Back in 2016, previous California Governor Jerry Brown put the seal of approval on Senate Bill 1107. What this allowed was that local governments could implement their own system of regulating money in politics. There were already a handful of cities that held a charter status, meaning they were permitted to do this already. For example, Los Angeles had their super match program, but we'll touch on that a little later. It was also fairly popular in the state legislature, passing in the Assembly 55-22 and in the Senate 27-12. However, the parade all came to a stop when Senate Bill 1107 was challenged in court. The ones to take the helm were Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association with former State Senator Quinn Kopp. They both filed suit against the governor, as well as the California Fair Political Practices Commission. On August 23, 2017, the Sacramento Superior Court ruled in favor of the plaintiffs that SB 1107 did not amend the PRA. The defendants appealed the decision to the California 3rd District Court of Appeal. Now it is Governor Gavin Newsom who continues the legal battle. Now, to put this whole ordeal into context, allow us to take a step back into history. Only a few decades, of course. Back in 1988, Proposition 73 was approved by voters, and the most significant aspect was that one individual can donate only $1,000 maximum to any campaign of their choosing. Two other things that were stipulated was that cities could enforce stricter limits on campaign finance, and public officials could not use public funds to assist in their election campaigns. This was all enacted on the tail end of California's conservative / Republican shifts. So it would make sense why voters would be against the use of tax dollars for virtually anything. Now, the rationale for the governor's support was to amend the Political Reform Act of 1974. The three significant aspects of the PRA was to reduce a candidate's reliance on huge donations from special interests, more oversight from local governments, and being able to abolish laws that are deemed too favorable for incumbents. Now, what Howard Jarvis basically opined was that the government should at least request the approval of voters before going ahead with a policy of that nature. But let's be honest, they probably would have litigated the entire thing anyway. So let us get back to the point of Los Angeles. Perhaps at this point you might have forgotten, but don't fret, I'm here to lazily remind you. Anyway, as I brought up earlier, the city of LA is a charter city. This means they are exempt from Prop 73 that was discussed earlier. You might have remembered the name of the program they've implemented, the Supermatch Public Financing Program. What it does is that if you make a donation to a certain campaign, the city will match it 6-1. This allows citizens without an immense amount of capital to make their voice heard and reduce the need for candidates to constantly having to court large corporate special interests. This is essentially a microcosm of what could be done at the local level and even state if SB 1107 stayed in place. However, something to keep in mind is that this is only a partial system where only some local tax dollars are used. It is not fully funded by the public, and that could change in the near future. As of right now, it appears it might be a legal gray area, since I am not aware of any case brought up against them for possibly violating Prop 73. We will see if that stays the course. Now let us get to the interesting part, at least for me anyways. Is the actual stakeholders themselves behind all of this. Firstly, Governor Gavin Newsom. His worldview revolves around improving the lives of the powerless through the use of government institutions, but still recognizes the importance of markets. And this has been constant throughout his political career. When serving as mayor of San Francisco, he described himself as, quote, a dogmatic fiscal conservative and a social liberal, end quote. An example of this would be his advocacy for same-sex marriage, but also vehemently rejecting tax increases. To this day, he still believes that. When he was discussing the shift within the Democratic Party, he states, quote, the more educated I become, the more I become a social justice warrior about systemic racism. But I'm still a passionate free enterprise Democrat. And I'm like Jerry, you gotta balance budgets too, end quote. His political ideology can be characterized as neoliberalism, but not conservative, believe it or not. In regard to the opposing party, you can find them on the other side of the dichotomy. Howard Jarvis is your standard single-issue political non-profit organization. What they fundamentally value is the power and autonomy of the individual, and the ability to improve their lives on their own volition, through the help of the free enterprise, of course. This attitude and ideology manifests by protecting the rights of California taxpayers and maintaining the integrity of Proposition 13. A frequent trend one can observe in their ballot initiatives and what they support is that they are against the use of public funds for virtually anything. Even with a tobacco tax for cancer research, they will oppose it out of principle. This is just one example of the numerous times they've shot down policies that can provide a lot of utility, for better or for worse. Truly the epitome of individualism. The relationship between these two boils down to the concepts of individualism and collectivism. More specifically, the dichotomy between the two. They serve as fundamental sets of values for pretty much everyone, regardless of political ideology. Now, what you're looking at the screen right now is a Venn diagram of the two. Collectivism, we can see on the left, that lists things like conformity, and I don't know why it is listed twice, but anyway, government planning, less individual freedom, economic equality, collective norms, etc. Meanwhile, on the right, we have individualism with things like individuality, creativity, self-determination, consumption determined by free market forces, and in the middle, we have things like public property, individual rights and freedoms, cooperation, rule of law, and collective responsibility. Now, of course, this is not a strict formula for either philosophy, but merely a sort of guideline for anyone wanting to determine their own sets of values. Now, in terms of membership, the governor is elected by voters, obviously. Meanwhile, the president, Howard Jarvis, is elected by the members of said organization. They pretty much serve and represent those who entrusted them with their vote. Now, if you're curious about the demographic makeup of their positions, it is unsurprisingly wealthy, straight, white, and cis male. And for those who, for whatever reason, are not able to make this observation, this is a predominant pattern in politics, at least representation-wise. Now, this should not really serve as a surprise considering the demographic makeup of the US as a whole historically, with the lack of diversity being endemic to the American government as well as NGOs. However, believe it or not, this is expected to change in the coming future, with new generations of public officials being elected at every level. Pew Research has found that 1 in 5 members in Congress are racial or ethnic minorities, and the amount of female members of Congress is a record high. This also goes for LGBT representation as well. The habitat for both stakeholders is Sacramento, California. This is the hub and battleground of political activity for the state. This is where the state legislature is based and where a multitude of other NGOs have their headquarters located. One of the conventional methods for anyone to enact tangible change is through lobbying. Now, oftentimes the phrase lobbying is coupled with a negative connotation because of the cynicism surrounding money in politics, but it is not always done by corporations. Plenty of times there are activists and even city governments looking to get legislation passed. Either way, this all creates a network of people looking to consult others, and thus a certain culture gets established and shared. A culture that usually has to be abided by in order for anyone to not only get in, but succeed. The language of the governor is one of typical political rhetoric, essentially the use of proper grammar and expansive vocabulary to convey a certain message that resonates with possible voters. trying to find a way to relate to people and speaking truth to power, addressing the problems affecting a certain community and pitching solutions for them. Sometimes one might consider it doublespeak, to speak and structure your words in an ambiguous way so as not to commit to anything or admit something you don't want to. No, the reason it is this way for so many politicians and political hopefuls is because of how it is proven to work. And it is no surprise Newsom is the same way, and he's even gone and stated that he tries to emulate Bobby Kennedy, down to the way he dresses. This goes to show how this sort of political culture can foster that type of behavior, even through the means of inspiration. Now, in regard to Howard Jarvis, I found columns from the president, and they read no different compared to something like an op-ed in a news publication, presenting things in a matter-of-factly way, but also trying to look out for the little man and warning about the conduct and actions of big bad government. All in all, this was meant to provide a somewhat brief overview of the disputes between the two parties, as well as try to relay an understanding of said parties and their motives. It is important to make descriptive claims about the world so we can establish a common premise that most, if not everyone, can work with, providing necessary context to avoid confusion and ignorance. Now, I don't know if anybody else has made this observation, but you'll notice that most people do in fact see themselves as good people. Even the ones we might abhor that hold odious beliefs still view themselves as a good person. So it is paramount that in order to comprehend someone else's perspective and reason with them, that is the foundation virtually everyone is operating from. The question for all you to ponder is that this whole contention rests on. Do the ends justify the means? If some sort of action can bring about good in this world, should it be executed even if it violates something else? Is it always important to do things out of principle, or is discretion the better part of valor? That is something you will have to determine for yourself.